specialist in maritime issues. John is a big fan of naval battles. So we can, because I was just born in Radomsko, this is definitely far from the seaside.
Well, I think the casters for this. Yesterday I went for a walk with the ship, and there is this classic World War II destroyer, which was one in the name translated from the which was crewed by worked for the Royal Navy during the war. I don't think there was anywhere in the UK real old-fashioned destroyer with forest guns and torpedo tubes and depth charge throwers and depth charge and I managed to hang off from the looked like still a and it was built in 1937. So it would have been one of the latest of that type of ship. In London, I don't know whether you know Ocean Belfast, which is one of the last of our battlefields guns, and actually fought against the Sean Hawks at Museum. And that was got together with a lot of money to London by Bridge. Quite an effort getting in that far ahead of the anyway, I've never been about that, it's never moved because they're that delicate. But it's still there, and you can go around this and but to see a real line destroyed was a very striking image about technology. I mentioned technology, by the way.
I can tell you I'm not the only.
I read newspapers and books and I go to them, I go on the tube in London, everybody. I am leaving the
But you are not the only reader of Guardian, still, I guess. They have. Yeah, but quite many titles they have huge problems with paper versions. There's a dramatic decline in most cases.
And the Guardian is always asking supported by the paper donating to Guardian newspapers.
We have almost all panelists.
Wtedy może poproszę jeszcze po mojej prezentacji ponownie pana, żeby
ja przedstawię Przedstawię krótko Johna i potem zrobimy tak, tak to będzie tak jak zrobimy po prostu tak, może ja pokażę Państwu, nie. Chyba tego nie ustalili. Tak. Nie ma Ja też nie będę długo, także
wczoraj jakoś próbowali, tak?
Dobrze. Niestety mamy tak dość wydzielone te egzemplarze. My też możemy rozpocząć prezentację do...
I oczywiście. Fajna sprawa.
No zobaczmy, to są te 125 osób. Nie. Naprawdę.
Ale różnica jest tak naprawdę obywateli.
No co, możemy zacząć? Prowadzić czy... Prezentację słuchałem, jak... Tak, już.
Dzień dobry, witam serdecznie wszystkich Państwa. Będę mówił po polsku. Sebastian Teregowski, wicedyrektor Muzeum Migracji. Witam Państwa bardzo serdecznie. Bardzo mi miło widzieć kilka znajomych twarzy, osób, z którymi mieliśmy już przyjemność współpracować w przeszłości. Witam Państwa na Międzynarodowej Interdyscyplinarnej Konferencji Naukowej zatytułowanej Europejskie migracje po 2004 roku. Przyczyny, skutki i perspektywy. Partnerami dzisiejszej konferencji jest Komitet Badań nad Migracjami Polskiej Akademii Nauk oraz Ośrodek Badań nad Migracjami Uniwersytetu Warszawskiego. Jest to trzecia konferencja naukowa organizowana przez Muzeum Emigracji. Pierwsza dotyczyła Ameryki Łacińskiej, druga dotyczyła Ameryki Północnej. W tym roku skupiamy się na Europie, na migracjach współczesnych. Kilka tygodni temu mieliśmy przyjemność gościć również coroczną konferencję sieci AKADEMII. Również rozmawialiśmy na temat migracji współczesnych i wyzwań temu towarzyszących. Przed nami dwa bardzo ciekawe, intensywne dni obrad. Na konferencji uczestniczy ponad 40 badaczy, naukowców reprezentujących różne dyscypliny. Podczas tegorocznej konferencji rozmawiać będziemy o najnowszych ustaleniach badawczych dotyczących przyczyn i konsekwencji ruchów migracyjnych wywołanych akcesją nowych państw do Unii Europejskiej po 2004 roku z perspektywy zarówno państw wysyłających, jak i przyjmujących migrantów. Skupimy się na takich zagadnieniach jak m.in. doświadczenia migracji poakcesyjnych, uwarunkowania, skutki, interpretacje, polityka migracyjna, wpływ migracji na Polskę, migrację wysoko wykwalifikowanych pracowników, współczesne procesy migracyjne, percepcje migrantów w krajach europejskich, polskie organizacje migranckie w Europie, kryzys migracyjny w Europie i jego konsekwencje, a także stan obecny i uwarunkowania migracji europejskich. Chciałbym skorzystać z okazji i przedstawić i podziękować bardzo serdecznie Komitetowi Naukowemu Konferencji, profesor doktor habilitowany Marek Okulski, profesor doktor habilitowany Dorota Praszałowicz, profesor Daniela Laforesta, doktor habilitowany Paweł Kaczmarczyk, doktor Magdalena Lesińska, doktor Jarosław Michalik, doktor Katarzyna Morawska i doktor Rafał Raczyński. Bardzo serdecznie dziękuję za wkład i energię włożoną w przygotowanie i opracowanie tej konferencji. Bardzo również serdecznie dziękuję całemu zespołowi Muzeum Emigracji za pracę i za przygotowanie tej konferencji. Przede wszystkim dr Katarzynie Morawskiej, dr Rafałowi Raczyńskiemu, który jest organizatorem i kierownikiem dzisiejszego zamieszania. Pozytywnym tego słowa znaczeniu, oczywiście. Na koniec kilka ogłoszeń natury technicznej dotyczącej dzisiejszej konferencji. Zachęcamy Państwa do zwiedzenia ekspozycji stałej. O godzinie 17:50 będziemy mieli oprowadzanie z panem Szymonem Jockiem, kierownikiem działu wystawy stałej. Niemniej jednak wystawa stała jest do Państwa dyspozycji, jest otwarta cały czas. Osoby dysponujące identyfikatorami konferencji mogą wejść na wystawę cały czas bezpłatnie. Przerwy kawowe będą przygotowane tutaj już za drzwiami konferencji w holu. Lunch będzie serwowany w restauracji. Dotyczy to posiadaczy identyfikatorów konferencji. Jeżeli usłyszycie Państwo alarm pożarowy, to oczywiście nie uciekamy, tylko swobodnie wychodzimy z budynku i kierujemy się w stronę wyjścia. I najbliższe toalety są już tuż po prawej stronie. Tutaj jak wchodzimy korytarzem, po prawej stronie są najbliższe toalety. Z mojej strony, chciałem kończyć toaletami, ale tak jak już wyszło. Życzę Państwu miłych i owocnych obrad. Jestem przekonany, że tematyka, którą się dzisiaj i jutro będziemy zajmować, jest bardzo na czasie, bardzo współczesna, wszystkim bardzo, bardzo interesująca. Tyle z mojej strony i oddaję głos panu profesorowi.
Dziękuję serdecznie. Tak, zostało już dość informacja o baletach, więc ja już nie będę musiał tego mówić. W związku z czym moje wprowadzenie będzie krótkie. Przede wszystkim chciałem podziękować wszystkim Państwu za przybycie i powitać Państwa. W szczególności chciałem podziękować organizatorom oczywiście. Panu dyrektorowi i panu Rafałowi Rafińskiemu, bo bez niego tak naprawdę to przedsięwzięcie nie miało szansy się odbyć. Chciałem także podziękować współorganizatorom, a w szczególności przedstawicielom Komitetu nad Migracjami Polskiej Akademii Nauk, którzy są na sali. Niestety profesor Marek Wolski z powodów zdrowotnych w ostatniej chwili musiał odwołać swoje przybycie, ale bardzo Państwa serdecznie pozdrawiam i życzę powodzenia w trakcie dyskusji. Oczywiście życzę wszystkich Państwa, zarówno tych, którzy będą się produkować w trakcie konferencji, jak i tych, którzy będą się przysłuchiwać naszym dyskusjom. Ja, jako że jestem dyrektorem Ośrodka Badań nad Migracjami i tenże ośrodek reprezentuję, to postanowiłem, że w trakcie tego krótkiego wstępu będę mówił o dwóch rzeczach. Po pierwsze o ośrodku, a po drugie o migracjach. Niestety Państwu zostawiam tu najtrudniejsze zadanie, żeby mówić o badaniach, ale tak wybrałem. Ośrodek. Mówię o tym nie bez powodu, ponieważ to nasze zaangażowanie w dzisiejsze przedsięwzięcie wynika po trosze z faktu, że w tym roku Ośrodek Badań nad Migracjami świętuje swoje 25-lecie. Nie jest to może przesadnie imponujący jubileusz, jeśli chodzi o jednostki naukowe w ogóle, ale jest to imponująca rzecz, jeśli mówimy o badaniach migracyjnych w Polsce i zaraz o tym powiem. Kiedy zastanawialiśmy się nad świętowaniem tego jubileuszu, podjęliśmy decyzję, żeby skupić się na naukowym wymiarze tego roku, bo nasze świętowanie trwa cały rok, trzeba Państwu wiedzieć. Ono się rozpoczęło w marcu tego roku, kiedy gościliśmy w Warszawie konferencję sieci międzynarodowej badaczy migracyjnych sieci MISCO, a dzisiaj tak naprawdę jest takie symboliczne zakończenie tego naszego roku jubileuszowego, więc obecność i moja, i wielu naszych badaczy tutaj jest także świadectwem tego, jak ważne jest dla nas to miejsce, bo to miejsce, trzeba Państwu wiedzieć, za chwilę rozumiem, Pan Dyrektor będzie o tym mówił szczegółowo, to miejsce wyjątkowe, jeśli chodzi o historię, ale także miejsce symboliczne, jeśli chodzi o polskie migrowanie. Proszę Państwa, ja mówię o tym OBM-ie, o tym 25-leciu nie bez powodu, bo na dobrą sprawę można by spojrzeć na te 25 lat naszych ostatnich doświadczeń jak na historię badań migracyjnych w Polsce. Proszę Państwa, w 1993 roku, kiedy powstał ośrodek tworzyło zaledwie 3 czy 5 badaczy, przyjaciół, którzy byli zafascynowani zmianą społeczno-ekonomiczną w Polsce. Na dobrą sprawę nikt wtedy nie zajmował się poważnie migracjami. Tak się to wszystko zaczęło. Dzisiaj sprawa wygląda zupełnie inaczej. Co roku Komitet Badań nad Migracjami organizuje konferencję środowiska migrantologiczne i corocznie na tych konferencjach obecnie zbiera się 200 do 250 osób i to są badacze migracji. Tak, to środowisko w Polsce jest już tak liczne i to pokazuje najlepiej, jak rozwinęły się badania migracyjne w Polsce. Na początku byli to przede wszystkim demografowie, którzy zupełnie incydentalnie zajmowali się kwestiami mobilności czy migracji. Dzisiaj jest to środowisko doskonale interdyscyplinarne. Są to socjologowie, są to ekonomiści, są to przedstawiciele nauk politycznych, psychologii, historii, prawa i mógłbym jeszcze długo wymieniać. To pokazuje drogę, jaką przebyła dziedzina badań migracyjnych w Polsce i ja osobiście tylko się z tego cieszę. To drugie słowo, do którego miałem się odnieść, to migracje, ponieważ wydaje mi się, że jesteśmy w bardzo dobrym momencie. Dzisiaj w roku 2018, 14 lat od momentu akcesji Polski do Unii Europejskiej. Polski i nie tylko Polski. Zacznę od tego, bo to chyba dość istotne. Myślę, że John Salt będzie też o tym wspominał. Rok 2004 był naprawdę przełomowy w migracyjnej historii Europy. Jeżeli weźmiemy pod uwagę obie akcesje, czyli z roku 2004 i 2007, liczba obywateli krajów Unii Europejskiej zwiększyła się wówczas o 1/4. I ta liczba najlepiej pokazuje, jak wielkim eksperymentem było rozszerzenie, jak wielkim eksperymentem było dopuszczenie swobody mobilności. Myślę, że wielu z nas już dzisiaj zapomniało, ale była to sprawa wielce kontrowersyjna, sprawa wywołująca polityczne i także naukowe spory, naukowe dyskusje. Zresztą, jak Państwo zapewne wiecie, nie obyło się bez problemów i większość krajów wprowadziło okresy przejściowe w dostępie do rynku pracy obywateli naszej części świata. Dzisiaj, i zmierzam już do końca, dzisiaj wydaje się, że jesteśmy w bardzo dobrej sytuacji, żeby zbliżyć się chociaż do naukowej oceny tego procesu. Tych lat, które spędziliśmy jako obywatele Unii Europejskiej i tych lat mobilności nie tylko Polaków, ale także innych obywateli nowych krajów członkowskich do Unii Europejskiej. Tym się będziemy tutaj zajmować. Będziemy rozmawiali o uwarunkowaniach, o czym mówił już Pan Dyrektor, będziemy mówili o mechanizmach, ale przede wszystkim chyba najważniejszym naszym zadaniem byłoby zastanowienie się, czy jesteśmy w stanie dziś z tej perspektywy wielu już lat dokonać oceny, czy też bilansu migracji koakcesyjnych. I życzę i sobie, i Państwu, żeby to zadanie udało nam się z powodzeniem zrealizować. Dziękuję.
Dlaczego mamy nowe przełączniki, które nie używamy? Stąd ta konsternacja. Kilka słów o miejscu i o instytucji, w której się znajdujemy. Slajdy są po angielsku, mamy kilka osób obcojęzycznych na sali i rozumiem, że to było trudne do przetłumaczenia jednocześnie przez tłumaczy. Szanowni Państwo, znajdujemy się w miejscu wyjątkowym, miejscu historycznym, w budynku dworca morskiego, który powstał w latach 30., który był częścią rozbudowanej, bardzo nowoczesnej infrastruktury emigracyjnej, która powstała w Gdyni w tamtych czasach na potrzeby obsługi ruchu emigracyjnego. Powstał obóz emigracyjny w dzielnicy Grabówek, powstał szpital kwarantannowy po drugiej stronie portu w dzielnicy Badoły, no i powstał dworzec morski, ten budynek, w którym się znajdujemy, który był takim pierwszym albo ostatnim punktem podróży, zależy jak na to patrzymy, dla tysięcy emigrantów, którzy wyjeżdżało z Polski w poszukiwaniu lepszego życia, wyjeżdżali w różnych okolicznościach. Jest to budynek, który pamięta silne emocje tysięcy osób, które z tego miejsca wyjechało. Budynek pełnił tę funkcję aż do lat 80. obsługi ruchu migracyjnego. Jest budynkiem wyjątkowym, jest miejscem wyjątkowym z racji tego, iż takich miejsc jak to, czyli budynek, który pełnił obsługę ruchu migracyjnego, a współcześnie jest Muzeum Emigracji, Migracji bądź Imigracji, jest takich miejsc zaledwie kilka na świecie. Myśmy tutaj przed rozpoczęciem konferencji właśnie zaczęli bardzo interesujący temat, czy jest gdzieś Muzeum Emigracji na świecie. Typowe Muzeum Emigracji, nie imigracji, nie migracji, tylko emigracji. Natomiast takich miejsc jak dworzec morski jest kilka. Jest oczywiście CELEM w Nowym Jorku, jest Pier 21 w Halifaxie, jest Red Star Line w Antwerpii, więc jest to miejsce wyjątkowe. Tak jak wspomniałem, miejsce pełne emocji. Tutaj po mojej lewej, Państwa prawej stronie nabrzeże francuskie, z którego odpływały słynne polskie transatlantyki z Batorem na czele. Jak widzimy, tysiące osób gromadziły się w tym miejscu w tych wyjątkowych chwilach, kiedy statki próbowały i odpływały. Budynek, który ma trudną historię, który był uszkodzony podczas II wojny światowej, ale który przetrwał i który przetrwał w takiej formie, jak widać tutaj na zdjęciu, aż do 2012 roku, w takiej zniekształconej formie, ze względu na eksplozję bomby. W 2012 roku, kiedy Muzeum Migracji zostało powołane jako instytucja, rozpoczął się całkowity proces odbudowy tego budynku, odtworzenia go tak naprawdę do kształtu i wyglądu z lat 30. Zachowane zostały wiele oryginalnych elementów, jak posadzka, nawet posadzka pod nami znajdująca się jest oryginalna, nie tą, która widać tylko 20 cm niżej. Także budynek jest odtworzony do stanu pierwotnego. No i tak to wyglądało kiedyś, tak wygląda dzisiaj, jak Państwo widzicie. Jesteśmy bardzo szczęśliwi, że budynek udało się odtworzyć do tego pięknego wyglądu. Był to bardzo nowoczesny, bardzo prestiżowy budynek w Gdyni w latach 30. i w latach późniejszych. Tutaj nie tylko odbywały się uroczystości związane z obsługą ruchu emigracyjnego, ale również z organizacją wielu wydarzeń kulturalnych. Tutaj się odbywały bale gdyńskich elit, zawody sportowe, sesje fotograficzne, śluby, chrzciny. I my tak po części przez naszą działalność staramy się nawiązać do tej historii miejsca. I miejsca bardzo kulturalnego. Otworzyliśmy się w 2015 roku, więc jesteśmy stosunkowo nową instytucją. Nasze motto, nasz slogan "Łączymy historię" i Connect Stories, tak myślę, że można nas streścić do jednego zdania. Z tego miejsca wypływało kilka znanych osób, m.in. profesor Zbigniew Brzeziński, jako 10-letni chłopiec z rodzicami, tak jak do Kanady, potem do Stanów Zjednoczonych. Tablica pamiątkowa profesora Brzezińskiego znajduje się koło muzeum. Kilka dosłownie fotografii z ceremonii otwarcia instytucji. To co ważne, to że Muzeum Emigracji jest pierwszym i jedynym muzeum w Polsce zajmującym się kompleksowo tematyką emigracji z Polski i ziem polskich na przestrzeni wieków. My na wystawie stałej, jak Państwo będziecie mieli przyjemność zobaczyć, skupiamy się na ostatnich 200 latach historii. Nakończymy na dniu współczesnym. Bardzo zależało nam przy konstruowaniu naszej ekspozycji stałej i w ogóle przy konstruowaniu działalności muzeum, abyśmy się skupiali nie tylko i wyłącznie na danych dotyczących migracji, ale przede wszystkim na emocjach, żeby pokazywać podróż migrantów ich oczami, żeby pokazać, co to znaczyło wyjechać 100-150 lat temu, co to znaczy wyjechać teraz, jakie są różnice, jakie są podobieństwa, jak historia lubi się powtarzać. Nasza wystawa stała, jak będziecie mieli Państwo przyjemność zobaczyć, opowiada ostatnie 200 lat historii migracji z Polski i ziem polskich. Zaczynamy tak naprawdę narrację główną po powstaniu listopadowym. Skupiamy się m.in. na pierwszych migracjach masowych, pierwszych migracjach ekonomicznych za kontynent. Przedstawiamy to w różnych formach, co Państwo będziecie mieli przyjemność zobaczyć. Poznajemy m.in. rodzinę Psikorek, jest to przykładowa rodzina, z którą podróżujemy przez kilka etapów podróży do Stanów Zjednoczonych. Pokazujemy główne tak naprawdę etapy w historii migracji z Polski i ziem polskich. Staramy się, aby ta podróż była bardzo realna i aby odzwierciedlała tak naprawdę jak to wyglądało. Przyjemność zobaczyć tą trudną podróż przez Atlantyk, choćby na przełomie wieku, zobaczyć kabinę trzeciej klasy, zobaczyć jak to wyglądało w Ellis Island, pierwsze kroki w Chicago, bardzo trudne początki w Brazylii. Przeróżne wątki na wystawie stałej są poruszane, więc to jest tylko taki przedsmak tego, co będziecie mieli Państwo okazję zobaczyć. Odtwarzamy również na wystawie stałej największą makietę statku na świecie, Batorego, wykonanego ze stali w skali 1:10. 16 metrów długości na 2,5 szerokości, który mamy nadzieję dokończyć w niedalekiej przyszłości, już jest dostępny do zwiedzania. Kończymy tak naprawdę, przechodzimy przez wszystkie okresy trudne, przez okresy wojenne. Nie przedstawiamy tylko migracji na wystawie stałej jako migrację sukcesu, jako kariery, przedstawiamy je bardzo szeroko, jako migracje polityczne, ekonomiczne, osobiste, z przeróżnych powodów. Przechodzimy przez okres PRL-u, przez okres Solidarności. Kończymy na czasach współczesnych. Cały czas staramy się ekspozycję aktualizować. Chcieliśmy Państwu przedstawić troszeczkę jeszcze zakres programowy instytucji, ponieważ staramy się być aktywną instytucją kultury, a nie instytucją, która skupia się przede wszystkim na działaniach wystawienniczych. I tutaj jest taki filmik i tym już nie uruchomię tego, muszę zajść tutaj, przepraszam, i to uruchomić. Tutaj jest nowy wskaźnik. Przemek jest. Dobrze, to z filmu w takim razie. Staramy się realizować bardzo szeroki zakres działalności programowej, edukacyjnej, badawczej, wydawniczej. Chcieliśmy Państwu zaprezentować kilka przykładów wydarzeń, które mieliśmy przyjemność zrealizować, które oczywiście nawiązują do tematyki migracyjnej, więc realizujemy przeróżne duże wydarzenia muzyczne. To jest akurat przykład widowiska muzycznego Emigracji, przykład współpracy z polskim kompozytorem Janem Kaczmarkiem, migrantem, który skomponował specjalną symfonię migracyjną dla Muzeum. Realizujemy przeróżne wydarzenia muzyczne, zarówno w budynku, zarówno w przestrzeni publicznej, wystawy czasowe, średnio 2-3 w skali roku. Tutaj kilka przykładów ostatnich ekspozycji czasowych, które mieliśmy przyjemność zrealizować. Oczywiście realizujemy konferencje naukowe, warsztaty, debaty o różnorodnej tematyce. Staramy się wykorzystać, jak Państwo widzicie, budynek na różne sposoby. Bardzo staramy się wychodzić naprzeciw oczekiwaniom mieszkańców i realizujemy wydarzenia skierowane do szerokiej grupy odbiorców. Realizujemy przedstawienia teatralne, gry miejskie, wydarzenia naukowe, warsztatowe, wydarzenia w przestrzeni publicznej, poza przestrzenią muzeum. To jest przykład już cyklicznego, mogę powiedzieć, działania, gdzie Muzeum Migracji jest odpowiedzialne za strefę kulturalną miasta poprzez większego festiwalu muzycznego w Gdyni Open Air, gdzie co roku budujemy specjalny pawilon i przygotowujemy wystawę dla zupełnie innego odbiorcy, który pojawia się w Trójmieście poprzez te kilka dni. Realizujemy przeróżne działania w przestrzeni miejskiej, prowadzimy księgarnię, która również realizuje cykliczne spotkania autorskie w tematyce migracyjnej. Wydaliśmy różnego rodzaju produkty naszej własnej produkcji, między innymi grę detektywistyczną poświęconą Batoremu, monografie naukowe w nawiązaniu do konferencji, które realizujemy, przeróżne publikacje. Wydajemy również czasopismo naukowe, polski przegląd migracyjny i prowadzimy bardzo rozbudowany projekt Archiwum Historii Mówionej, który nazywa się Archiwum Migranta. gdzie rejestrujemy wspomnienia emigrantów, Polaków na całym świecie, zarówno w formie audio, wideo, albo w formie spisanej. Jeżeli chodzi o zbiory muzeum, większość zbiorów muzeum jest dostępna na specjalnej stronie dedykowanej w postaci zdigitalizowanej. To tyle, dziękuję za uwagę. Nie wiem, czy uda nam się uruchomić ten film, ponieważ mi się nie udało. To jest przed slajdami. To dziękuję pięknie. Tyle na temat muzeum. Już przechodzimy do właściwego tematu konferencji. Ja poproszę pana profesora o przedstawienie naszego następnego i głównego. Dziękuję.
Many thanks and impressive as always. I have to say that the museum is absolutely on the very top of my personal list of museums, and this is absolutely a place to see and a place to be with the best address possible. Of course. I switched to English because right now we are about to start the first session of the conference and with our distinguished guest, Professor John Salt, and it's my enormous pleasure right now to welcome here John, who is also a friend of ours for years right now. Professor John Salt is a geographer by training, and he started his academic career years ago at the University of Liverpool. And I'm afraid we don't have enough time to discuss all of his publications, awards, and professional successes. So what I would just see that John Salt is recently Emeritus Professor at the University of London, University College London, and also still Director of Migration Research Unit, or just, yeah. And what is really important, he used to serve or serve as a consultant to numerous British and also international institutions, including European Commission, OECD, United Nations, and many other. And in fact, when we decided to invite John, our intention was, okay, well, John will tell you the best. What was the intention? Maybe one remark at the very end. The presentation, as far as I know, will be focused mostly on historical processes to a large extent. However, we are facing Brexit soon, so feel free also to ask questions then about what will happen in the foreseeable future. John, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Is that okay? Can I be heard? Thank you. That was a wonderful introduction. First of all, I'm really very honoured to be here at this museum, this gathering, and certainly to be asked to speak. While I was looking at the introduction to the museum, it occurred to me, of course, that I come from an emigration country. If you go back to the 18th century, early 19th century, the Highland clearances occurred in Scotland, and that was when the large landowners decided that sheep made them more money than peasants, and so they replaced one with the other. And the peasants, many of them emigrated to the United States, and of course Ireland was part of the British Isles, still is part of the British Isles, but of Great Britain in the 19th century, and the main flow of people from our country in the 19th century was from Ireland to America. And of course, much of the first half of the 20th century, it was British policy, British government policy, to populate the empire with Britons who would go there and colonise Australia, Canada, Kenya, and other places. So emigration was writ large into the history of the UK. And yet it's only in the last few years that we've ever had any idea of creating a museum related to migration. And it's a very small affair devoted to a particular part of the immigration flow into Britain in recent decades. So we are a country of emigration, but actually we think of ourselves very much now as one where immigration is a major concern. Listening to what I just heard, I couldn't help wondering that if Poles hadn't come to Britain in numbers after 2004, probably we wouldn't be leaving the European Union. That's how the debate went. It's nothing to do with Poles as a particular group, but the immigration issue in general. Now, I come to you with a history of looking at my international migration. I think I gave my first lecture in 1969 on the international migration, then particularly Turks and Yugoslavs to Germany and to Switzerland and to the rest of them. And my first publications in the early 1970s were concerned with that movement. And in a sense, I've gone through the way in which European migration has transitioned, and I've seen how the different sorts of flows have come up and faded away again and stayed, and how attitudes to them have changed. Perhaps the biggest plus that I've gained is friendship of people and scholars in so many other countries with whom I've come into contact, international organisations, international conferences. I was, for example, the UK, still am, as a matter of fact, the UK correspondent to the OECD's Stockholm Committee since 1985, and had the happy introduction in 1991 to Marek POLSKIEJ, who became a very good friend. And he and I have managed to do a little work together, perhaps not as much as we would like to. And then subsequently to Pavel. These are people I regard not as just as colleagues, but very much as friends as well. Well, when Pavel asked me to give this lecture, and I have 40 minutes, so I'm going to time myself, his brief was really quite wide. He said, to locate somehow contemporary Polish migration in the European mobility context. Think about that. So on reflection, it occurred to me that, okay, I need to give some brief historical comment, it's inevitable. And given the constraints of time, what do? I can't cover everything. So I'll focus probably on economic migration, which studies have shown to be the main drivers. Now, before 1990, as we know, there were three interrelated but distinct migration regions developed in Europe. Western Europe,
Central and Eastern Europe, and the USSR, were largely independent. But whereas the USSR system has metamorphosed into a Russia-based one, focused on drawing in Russian citizens from elsewhere in the CIS, the Western and Eastern systems have become much more integrated. The fusion stimulated by freedom of movement within the EEA and the emergence of the UK and Germany as economic hubs within the new system. Now, the main historical context is well known. In Western Europe, the aftermath of war was followed by the institution of free movement among the original six. Basically, it was 4 of the countries, Germany, France, Belgium and Luxembourg being short of labour, and temporarily the Netherlands and Italy having a surplus of labour, and the idea was that the shortages in the first 4 would be met by surpluses from the other 2. And there was an immediate agreement of interest between the 4 countries. And the movements did work in that way. Italy actually became the main supplier. But then came inflows from the Mediterranean countries, Portugal, Spain, Greece, and later from the south more generally. Waves of migration were accompanied by hiatuses when attention turned to integration as temporary migrants became settlers, and former emigration countries became ones of immigration. And that's a message that I think I want to keep looking at throughout this talk. It was inevitable that after 1990, and particularly 2004, that new emigration countries would transform into ones of immigration too, as they have. Poland receives migrants from Ukraine and Belarus, as well as increasingly engaging in exchanges with Western neighbours. The latest Stockholm report for Poland suggests a country, hope I'm not treading on your toes here, suggests a country on the way to becoming one of immigration with an emphasis on skills. In 2016, inflow grew by 15%, temporary residence permits were up by 1/3, while data for the first half of 2017 pointed to more than 100% increase in the number of work permits issued, 108,000 as a matter of fact, compared with the corresponding period in 2016. So for the most part, I believe that statistics don't lie, although I do accept they can be manipulated by some people. Now, as these flows have proceeded, what we've done as migration researchers is to develop new paradigms to explain them. And these paradigms provide lenses in which to view the last 2 decades and also give us a window onto the future. I think that's important. Now, in this gathering, there's no point in me summarising Polish international migration. Others are much better placed than me to do that. But in any case, how could I compete with the recently published magisterial Impact of Migration on Poland, published by UCL Press, the authors of which are here, and also the recent paper by Russell King and Marek Kolski on mapping migrations in Europe. What I will do, though, is begin by starting with a thumbnail sketch of Polish migration to the UK, an exercise made more relevant by Brexit. And we can start by going back some 70 years. In 1947, the Polish Resettlement Act, Britain's first mass immigration law, was passed by the British Parliament. It offered British citizenship to more than 200,000 former troops and their families. In addition, there was a European voluntary workers scheme for bringing in temporary workers to the UK, which lasted from October 1946 to December 1949, and the largest group of these voluntary workers were Poles and Polish Ukrainians. about 27,000 of them. 3/4 were male. And the slide here is taken from data in the last UK census, which now, a few years ago, 2011, but it's the most recent we have. It shows that in the numbers of people arriving before 1961, in the 1951 census, the Polish-born population of the UK numbered 162,000, which was up from 45,000 in 1931. And the point I want to make is that for many parts of the UK, the Polish population came to be accepted as normal. And an anecdote here, I was brought up in a small town in the English Midlands. There was had been an American army camp during 1944. It became a camp in which 500 Polish families were housed, and they were housed in that camp for about 10 years until the local authority built a whole new housing estate 2 or 3 miles outside the town for this Polish community. 200 families moved in with their Polish priest. Some of them are still there. And my own personal story is that one of my friends I travelled with on the bus to the local Catholic grammar school, Jan Kapusta, I still remember his name, was from that camp, and it was natural for me and for others of my generation to know and to be associated with the Polish population. Now, if we look at the graph, you can see that the big arrival was between 2004 and 2006, and then the number goes down. I put this slide on because it comes from mostly from the paper that Marek, Kolski and I produced about 3 years ago now. And it's based on Polish data. And you can see the comparison in numbers between Poles going to the UK and Poles going to Germany. And before 2002 and up to 2004, Germany was winning. Germany was the main destination for the Polish emigrants. After that, the United Kingdom began to take over, and according to your data, in 2015 there were 720,000 Poles in the UK. The UK data, incidentally, show 855,000 Poles in 2015, based on the labour force survey. Now, what this slide does, again using labour force survey data, is to compare the number of Poles recorded on a year-by-year basis, and bear in mind that this is a sample survey, and therefore there will be sampling errors which account for year-to-year fluctuation. And it shows the rise in number in the top line of Poles living in the UK, and the lower line, Poles who were living in the UK and also working during those years, and the little black bit blob records the number living according to the census and the number working according to the census. And you can see the way in which there was this steady rise with a blip, of course, at the time of the recession, and then over the last couple of years, beginnings of a substantial fall in the stock of Poles in the UK. In 2018, the number of Poles living in the UK was down 18% from its peak, and the number working was down 15%. Now, national insurance number data, everyone who comes to work in the UK gets a national insurance number, and the data records those that were issued, most of them for people who are working. You also have to have a national insurance number if you're going to claim any kinds of welfare benefits. But again, it shows the way in which the number of Poles coming in to register for work in the UK fell dramatically in the years after the Great Crisis. And then there was a subsequent recovery before, again, a more recent fall. Incidentally, combining national insurance data with data from another scheme, the workers' registration scheme, Marek and I calculated that by 2011, about 1.14 million Poles had come to work in the UK. If we, flows by population, yes, these data are from the International Passenger Survey, and the numbers down the side are 1,000, 10,000, 20, 30, 40. It shows the number of Poles recorded as coming in to live in the UK for at least 1 year, and who are leaving and intend to leave for at least 1 year. And you can see how, again, after 2008, there was a substantial shift. And since then, the graphs have been fairly flat. The flow of Poles has been more or less around 30,000 inflow, and the outflow between 10 and 20,000, giving a net migration in the teens of thousands. But the sample is very small, and 10,000, for example, is going to be plus or minus 3,000 or even more. So don't take too much notice of year-to-year fluctuations. It's the general picture that I think is significant. And here are the unemployment rates recorded for different nationalities. The bottom line is for Poles. The top line is for foreign nationals, other foreign nationals, and then the middle line is for the UK domestic population. So again, with fluctuations, which may be because of the small sample, we can see that the Poles who come to Britain to work have very low unemployment rates, and I suppose that in itself is an attractive force. And then my final graph is births to Polish mothers, and I use this as an indication of settlement. And you can see how from 2005 onwards, the births recorded increased dramatically, and then began to level off around about the time of the crisis. And there's been reasonably flat, increasing a little over recent years. But I think what we've got here in the UK data is evidence of a maturing migration stream, which may well, almost certainly has, in fact, peaked in terms of both flows and stocks. Of course, the big unknown now is what happens after Brexit. We can't even be sure to what extent the changes that we can see are explained by Brexit. Thank you. That's the last of the slides. Now I want to take a rather broader view. During the 1950s, and particularly the 1960s, labour migration was demand-led. The number of foreign workers recruited into Northwest Europe grew rapidly. Most, as I've indicated, came from Southern Europe. Inflows peaked about 1970, and then some countries took steps to slow down migration. In 1978, for the first time, SOPAMI noted that Greece, Spain, Italy had become countries of immigration, and signs of convergence between northern and southern European countries were noted. And there was an awareness that the geography of migration was shifting. Now, what was underlying that migration was what came to be called the buffer theory in Roger Vernon's term Konjunkturpuffer. German speakers will be able to pronounce that and know what it is, quite better than I do. The underlying principle of buffer theory, which keeps re-emerging as states seek temporary migration as a response to labour demand, is that when times are good, migrants will flow in. When times are bad, the easily manipulable and legally disposable stock will go home. Foreign labour then seen as more flexible than native workers, but that flexibility comes from turnover. So without turnover, there would be less flexibility. And essentially, the benefits of labour migration derive from its turnover. More turnover and lower settlement leads to more economically beneficial effects. Governments, it seems to me and to many others, have continued to believe that buffer theory, on the whole, is one worth holding on to. The issue, though, is that really it doesn't work very well. For it to do so, not only should new immigration be halted at a time of recession, but foreign workers would return home. Buffer theory has no place for temporary migrants to convert into permanent settlers. Nevertheless, the UK government seems to think it will work. In its post-Brexit proposal, it is assumed that all labour migrants will come with time-limited visas, and at the end of the visas will go home. So we'll have this turnover of population through the UK, and that will be it. I mean, if you think that University College London is going to be able to attract over a professor of very hard mathematics and his research team from America going to work in the UK, but that after 5 years, when their visas expire, they're all going to go home, they can think again, because these sorts of things don't happen. Temporariness doesn't really work. Indeed, my colleagues and I reviewed changes in stocks and flows of migrants involving the UK and other Western countries from the 1970s through to the recession of 2008-2009. And in all cases, there was a fall in the number of foreign migrants entering at the time of the peak of the recession. But for a limited period only. There was no significant downturn, apart from a very limited one, in the short term, in outflows, and there was a continuing rise in migrant stocks. And this has been broadly true across the board. So in sum, the tendency across Europe has been, despite the initial government policies, for a predominantly young, single and temporary population to become a settled one as more migrants arrive and are joined by spouses and children. And as far as the UK is concerned, this is the picture for Polish migration. The 2011 census suggested a relatively newly arrived Polish population, showing evidence of settled maturity. It was young, gender balanced, engaging in family formation, well educated, good English language skills, engages mainly with the private rented housing sector, but with 1 in 7, by then in some form of ownership of a house, which indicates stability. Over 80% in employment, a substantial number in self-employment, industry and occupation distributions showing a wide penetration of the UK economy, although still, at that time, with a tendency to occupy relatively low-skilled jobs. The 1990s, sorry. The 1990s heralded a new paradigm which saw the emergence of really a managed migration industry, is the best way to put it. As you know, in the early 1990s, governments across Europe were confronted with a new set of migration conundrums. New economic flows developed between East and West and within Central and Eastern Europe. Some were permanent, many were short-term, and a new lexicon grew up to describe them: labour tourism, pendular migration, petty trading, transit migration, and of course there was Marek Polski's incomplete migration, an idea neatly encapsulating the reality that migrants might live in one country most of the time, but make a living in a neighbouring one. Of course, the Balkan Wars in the 1990s brought new flows and a new asylum regime came into being as a result of those problems, consequent upon the breakup of the Yugoslav Federation, and led to widespread use of temporary protection. So there were things for European governments to think about that they hadn't had to think about for a long time. Then we fast forward through to 2015, when hundreds of thousands crossed sea and land borders, the scale described in the media is unprecedented. In effect, none of the flows that occurred were new forms of mobility. They were just like older ones, occurring often in new places and times. For example, an estimated 20 million people were on the move after World War II. About 1 million Pieds Noirs left Algeria for France in the 1960s. And from time to time, new migration waves have come to be seen as the norm, with varying geographies, typologies, and durations. And these have posed difficulties for migration scholars. How on earth, like Theresa May at the party conference last year, how on earth are we going to explain these? And I think two interconnected concepts emerged. That migration could be construed as a business and that it was managed by a range of actors. Now, as a business, international migration is populated by a range of institutions, each of which has some managerial influence on the processes, patterns, and outcomes of movement. The business model began actually. The business model began with attempts to explain patterns, trends, and processes of irregular migration. It's a time when Marek, I remember, described Poland as a corridor through which migrants moved on the way to Germany. And then as the borders to the west closed, I remember him describing it as a vestibule because the people tended to be stuck in that corridor. In recent crises, of course, we've seen the effects of smugglers, rescue organisations, governments with conflicting views on the openness of their borders, charities involved, employers. Employers, by and large, looking for new sources of labour. It's always escaped me to, perhaps people are going to come up with a different view, why there was so much criticism of Germany opening its borders to Syrians, when the Syrians who came were coming from a highly developed country with a well-educated, much of it university-educated population. If your fertility level is down there and you're looking for labour shortages, I'm not saying that this was the reason that Angela Merkel opened the border at all, but it does give pause for thought about the skills that migrants can bring, even those who come in something of a rush. Now, if we look at legal flows, in addition to migrants themselves, institutions include employers, trade unions, governments, regulatory bodies, migrant organisations, and facilitators such as lawyers and gangmasters. And these constitute networks of interrelationships, some of which are more important than others. They each have their own operational strategies, and to achieve their objectives, they negotiate with each other to achieve those objectives through compromise accommodations, and which produce migration outcomes. So only by looking at migration flows in the round can we determine individual influence. For example, over the last couple of decades, international student mobility is increasingly seen as a money earner, as employers, governments, and educational institutions realised that international students could be a source of income and skills. More countries changed their legislation to allow international graduates to stay on and seek and take up work. One of the jobs that I've done for the OECD over the last decade or so is to review the new migration policies of OECD member states. And the constant theme running through it is opening up your labour market to the international students who graduate from your universities to take advantage of their skills and their language and other abilities. And I see, for example, that in Poland, international student enrolments were up by 15% in 2017, and that new legislation has made it easier for international graduates of Polish universities to enter employment here, in line with the new strategy of October 2017 for the internationalisation of Polish academic and research institutions. Employers have an important role to play in the migration business, and one that's too often downplayed, with the attention being given to government policy prescriptions, such as priority for investors and entrepreneurs. Large employers, when we look at them, generally have what we can call portfolios of mobility, lovely phrase, which they use to recruit and redistribute their labour resources internationally. So what are portfolios of mobility? In firms, they are influenced by sector-specific characteristics and a set of key factors which determine the types of mobility that an employer will use for specific purposes, in particular places and particular times. Let me give you an example. If you're opening up a new manufacturing plant, you move one of your staff over, or you recruit someone who's a specialist to go and work in building and equipping that plant. Then you recruit someone, or you transfer someone who is good at getting production up and running and getting the thing going. And so you transfer those skills. The oil industry it uses, call them migration, mobile people, of course, in 30-day periods on its oil rigs, 30 days out, 30 days back. So there is this continual circulation of people that keeps the oil business going. So these portfolios combine external recruitment, permanent staff transfers, expatriate residential assignments, business travel, commuting, even virtual mobility to sustain corporate functions across a variety of production and market environments. In other words, they create a mobility continuum along which knowledge moves and may be exchanged at any point. So migration, as we think of it as a permanent movement, is normally identified as merely one point on this continuum of mobility. And I would argue that we've now moved towards, in advanced countries like ours, towards a mobility of expertise rather than a mobility so much of people. And the concept of mobility of expertise is particularly important where countries are wedded to attracting and keeping highly skilled labour and then competing with others. It's no coincidence the UK government's post-Brexit proposal is to focus on the immigration skills required by the economy. To my mind, this requires an approach to international migration that moves away from a focus on the physical movement of people towards a more disembodied view in which the mobility of an individual's knowledge, as distinct from the physical geographical shift of place or home or work, represents a new form of mobility. Within international, commercial and other organisations, several different forms of labour mobility occur, some involving long-term bodily movement, others very short stays, some with no physical movement at all. Physical movement does continue to be required in many cases. In those sectors where personal service is paramount, such as health and social care, hospitality, this requirement will continue for some time, depending upon whether there is a source of labour prepared to do the jobs at the going rate and governments are willing to acquiesce to employer demands. At the more highly skilled end, for example, surgery requires an example to carry it out. But it's not uncommon these days for some surgeons to fly in over the weekend carry out their work, do the operations, and fly out again at the end. Elsewhere, communications technology has been seized upon and developed by many modern organisations, particularly those operating in international environments. To them, labour mobility is less the physical movement of people and more the transfer and exchange of knowledge, individual expertise for longer or shorter periods of time, delivered in various ways. So knowledge exchange then becomes mobility of brains without body. And nowadays, with more diverse markets and growing competition, expert human resources are increasingly regarded as globally available and mobile. So in other words, mobility may be long-term, but it may also be short-term or even virtual, supplementing, complementing and substituting for other forms of transferring knowledge geographically. Modern satellite and fibre optic communications, faxes, email, mean that specialists can be in almost constant touch with each other, with tele, video conferencing, dealing with routine business. The disadvantage of not being in the same room as the person with whom one is conferring declines, although it is recognised that the ultimate advantage of physical contact will prevail in those sectors which traditionally place a premium on the quality of people and personality. New information technology then enables the multiplication of possible meeting places. You don't have to carry out the business at home, you can carry it somewhere else, depending on the particular circumstances of the moment. To the modern professional, managerial and technical worker, office support and files are only a modem or a Wi-Fi link away. This means that people can stay put while their expertise travels forward. Time difference means that an international company operating in different jurisdictions, say in Poland, New Zealand and the United States, is able to work on a problem on a 24-hour basis. While the Pole sleeps, the New Zealander can be beavering away, so that the results can be on the Warsaw desk at breakfast time. In recent years, knowledge has been considered as existing in an array of forms. Symbolic, embodied, embrained, encultured. A typology which enables the analyst to focus on the differences between knowledge of information, such as symbolic knowledge, and context-dependent knowledge relating to expertise. For example, cultural knowledge you gain by spending time working in the country where your firm is operating and sells and so on, so you have a knowledge of how they work, you need a knowledge of how they work. Or embrained and embodied knowledge, the knowledge that I have acquired through the years that I've been working on international migration, so can pull things out of my brain in a way that other people who've not had that experience can't. So there are different sorts of knowledge, but we can apply those different sorts of knowledge to different sorts of mobility situations. So the exchange of symbolic knowledge, for example, may be associated more with shorter-term mobility, like business travel, and virtual forms of mobility than those which relate to business development or global integration, which require a more hands-on approach. And it follows that different types of mobility may be associated with different roles and types of knowledge transfer, as well as the different assimilative capabilities of receiving institutions. For example, I remember talking to one company where they said, well, what we do, we have a project with the aerospace company. And the aerospace companies work with each other. You get A-class companies like Airbus and Boeing, Rolls-Royce, General Electric, and B-class companies like Smiths Industries, which do the electronics and the undercarriages and so on. And they work together. So initially the contacts tend to be done by, I suppose, what the politicians call the Sherpas, the people who do the work, and they set up the exchange of information. And then the more senior people go over, and then they work from there onwards. So you have this ability to exchange expertise at a distance, underpinned by information and communication technologies. Now, much of my recent work has focused on ways in which these different types of mobility interact. So that virtual mobility, as in the aerospace example, can be used to prepare for effective meetings, increasing productivity by eliminating the need for business travel to prepare for meetings, and possibly limiting the duration of eventual business moves. And the first thing that goes when companies are cutting costs, mobility costs, is business travel. That I found also. So you have business travel which starts things off, and then face-to-face interaction of various sorts, builds relationships and trust amongst clients. So where does this get us? I'm now down to 2 minutes. Just enough. The European message is that as economic circumstances equalise, movements between EEA countries will become ones of great exchange, and that's already happening. The main focus will be on skills in response to particular national requirements. Physical movement will be among those with specialist knowledge, not routine administrative skills. One would like to think that greater productivity will gradually remove the demand for low-skilled labour, but inevitably some will continue. The UK government's hope is that increased productivity will reduce the amount of demand for low-skilled labour, and therefore the inflow of low-skilled migrants after March next year. So perhaps Europe's second business challenge is how to compete in a global skills market, not just to ensure a supply, but also to prevent the loss of homegrown talent. And already we know that, particularly in a number of the Baltic states, measures to encourage expatriates to return are extremely active. Looking ahead, the development of forms of artificial intelligence will begin to impinge on the migration of people. If robots are capable not only of storing, analysing and exchanging information, but also of proposing and responding, how much interaction, human interaction, will become redundant. I said that was the second biggest problem. The biggest challenge, I've skipped that, but it is how can we manage the inevitable migration flows that will stem from climate change and environmental pressures, which are likely to become key importance in the next 15 to 20 years. I sit on a group of people which looks at the assumptions behind the UK population projections. And the one thing that we keep shelving, because we don't know the answer, is how are we going to deal with environmental pressures and the migration flows consequent upon them that we cannot yet measure and don't know for certain in what form they will happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John, and thanks not only for presenting us your vision of Polish migration to the UK, but also for the very last part. And what I have right now in my head is just the vision of migration of robots. So probably this is what we'll study in the next 20 years or so. So now we have still, I guess, 15 minutes for discussion. So the floor is open. I guess we'll just collect several questions and then we'll have a chance to answer. I guess you can also ask your questions in Polish and we'll somehow translate. So if necessary, feel free to ask also in Polish.
Jan Barnicki from Konferencja University from Warsaw. I would like to ask you a question about the influence of Brexit on decision of Polish migrants in the UK. They decide to come back to Poland or to stay forever in England, because if you think about the petrol crisis in 1973, where mainly it was the circulation and migration from Muslim countries to Europe. When this crisis happened, they decided to stay forever.
I guess we can collect one question.
Hello, I'm Dominika Pszczółkowska from CMR. My question is a bit similar, particularly in light of the data you showed on polls in the UK, and there seemed to be a very significant drop there in 2018, so I guess in the first quarter or first 2 quarters of 2018. So what is happening there? Is it people not coming or people leaving? And what is your interpretation of why that is happening?
I would be happy to add my 2 questions, if I'm allowed to. The first one refers to the buffer theory you mentioned, and I would agree that largely it's simply not working. So my question is why we are still referring to it, and first of all, why politicians and policymakers is still referring to buffer theory? What would be your reading of it? And the second question, because this is still quite mysterious, probably not only for me, and it's the very issue of Polish migration to the UK after 2004. Because generally we could say that what really drives migration is what you say, institutional agents, including formal recruitment and informal recruitment, and also migrant networks. But in case of this particular process, those 2 issues, they were not present. So what did you answer? What was really the main driver of so massive Polish migration to the UK? Okay, so we think about our questions for next round and right now.
Well, in answer to the first question, what will happen? I'm pretty sure they will stay. There will be not everyone. There will be some continuing flow of the stock that's already there. It is going to attract more people in. Dare I say, much depends on what happens to the Polish economy and what happens to the UK economy after Brexit. We've already seen that wage rates in the UK are much less competitive now than they were, and the new migrants who are coming in are Bulgarians and particularly Romanians rather than the ones who came after 2004. So I think we've probably seen the end of any substantial Polish immigration into the UK. As Polish immigration curve will almost certainly be related to family movements. Take Juliana as an example. My wife and I were staying in a nice hotel in Norfolk about a month ago now. It was a very nice girl who was serving in the restaurant. We got to talking to her. She's Polish. Her fiance was the chef in what is a highly starred restaurant, so he was highly skilled. The day after we left, they were travelling back to Poland to get married. Then they were coming back here. He had a new job at an even bigger hotel, and she was going to be here, and no doubt they would settle down, and that would be the case. That was the story that was told. You can argue anything on the basis of anecdote, but there's no evidence that there is large-scale movement. Apart from the most recent data, we do not have flow data which are good enough to be able to say whether there's been a substantial fall across the board or whether it's only on the massive vote since the Brexit decision was made. And Now, since we in the UK have no idea what Brexit will bring, the government has no idea what sort of Brexit it was. The whole thing was an incredible mess, but I don't see why Brexit will go away. What happened in 2018? It may well be a statistical aberration, but I think the fall was probably too much for it to be so. The UK economy continues to absorb labour. Unemployment rates are very low, vacancy rates are extremely low. There's not very much more that I can say. I really have no idea why movements going on. I would hope there are people in this room who've got their ears to the ground in Poland and are in a much better position for me to say. But I don't at the moment see that there are conditions in the UK which will encourage people to think, okay, there is an anti-immigration feeling. I think to some extent it is media generated, although there are a disturbing number of cases. But why? I can't give an answer to that. Why do governments hang on to buffer theory? Because they're afraid of acknowledging that migration will be permanent. So the UK government has had a policy since 2011 of bringing in only temporary migrants, and the number of migrants has stayed every year. I catalogue from the SOPEMI report the number of people who come in on temporary permits who are given extensions and allowed to stay. And so although the ostensible cap is 20,000, the number of visas issued each year is up around 80,000–90,000. The driver in 2004, Marek and I, the paper Marek and I took, well, more than touched on this. Marek's view was that the drivers were particularly strong here in Poland for all sorts of reasons. And an attitude had developed which was that we must embrace freedom of movement and so on, and the number of places that freedom of movement could go is limited. The interesting thing from the UK point of view is that 250,000 Poles came in over a period of 2 or 3 years, and the other Eastern Europeans as well. It had absolutely no effect on the unemployment graph and on the vacancy graph. In other words, those people came in and took jobs that we didn't know we had. But actually, if you look at the investment in, say, agricultural processing and agriculture, where a lot went, the graph of employment in those industries was doing that. In 2004, it did that. Investment was going up, and then when the labour became available, investment leveled off. So cheap labour substituted for costly investment is the it's the stock answer, and it's probably the simplest answer.
Well, I guess we still have time, space for 1 or 2 questions, so feel free to ask.
Alexandra Soika, Muzeum in Madrid. I wanted to ask you if you could elaborate a little bit more about the first thing that you said about Brexit being triggered or being the outcome of Polish migration specifically to the UK. So we know that migration attitudes or migration threat played a role, but if you could argue a little bit more, why do you think that this is the main trigger of the vote? Thank you.
The very last chance. Okay, so we close the floor. John.
Well, in a sense, that seemed like an off-the-cuff remark. It wasn't really. The 2 things were going on. One was after 2010, when we had a change of government, there was a totally different attitude towards investment in public services, in housing, in education, in health service, and so on. At the same time, there were some really rather nasty lobby groups which were hammering away at the rise in the UK population, even before 2004, actually, which were triggering so-called crises in the provision of public services. After 2011, certain parts of the media and a number of quite influential lobby groups and politicians on the right-hand side of the main government party were also arguing very strongly for constraints on immigration. When the Brexit issue came up, it was focused on immigration and we must seek control of our borders. The phrase that we used time and time again was, we must have control of our borders. Now, added on to this was a policy that the Conservative government coming into power in 2010, certainly led them, promise they made was to reduce immigration in the UK, net immigration, to the tens of thousands. And so they established a policy, and it was led by Theresa May's Home Secretary, who was now the Prime Minister, which was to bring in more and more legislation, which actually constrained the number of people who could come into work. And there was a strong feeling then, for example, that a lot of the work was being done illegally or below regular payments. So you had a number of things going on, and these coalesced in the Brexit debate around one or two major issues. And the major issue above all others, apart maybe from one against the National Health Service, was immigration, and we must reduce the number of immigrants. And that was then an easy step to, we must reduce the number of immigrants in routes where we are not in control, even though they were in our control. Nobody ever satisfactorily dealt with the question, well, why is it that that route that we are able to control, which is the non-EU, is also going up? You know, we are not controlling the route that we can control. Therefore, we must control the route that we can't control, was an illogical argument. But it gained an awful lot of traction. And that's why I think that, you know, in a sense, if there had not been a large increase in immigration after 2004, then the issue of controlling our borders would not have been the case. It's interesting that nobody ever complained about the French, the Germans, the Dutch, and the other people who were in Nordic countries who were coming in.
And stealing jobs. And stealing jobs, of course.
And jobs. Yeah.
Many thanks for sharing your thoughts, John, and also for answering our question. And right now it's time to close the first session. I guess because we are somehow late, we'll just start the next session, panel session, 5 to 11. So now it's time for coffee.